Hey, everybody! Grab your popcorn because today's history lesson is going to be a blast.
In the late 17th century, Salem Village, a Puritan community in Massachusetts, bore witness to an eerie and infamous event in American history: the Salem Witch Trials. This dark chapter unfolded in a deeply religious and rigid society, where deviations from the norms sparked suspicion. Our exploration of this harrowing history begins with the societal backdrop and the emergence of accusations, leading to trials and executions. With a commitment to precision and depth, we unravel the Salem Witch Trials, seeking to understand both the events and their lasting impact on society. The context of 17th century New England. In the late 17th century, New England, a region in the northeastern part of what is now the United States, was strongly influenced by a religious group known as the Puritans. These Puritans were a group of English Protestants who sought to reform the Church of England. They believed in living a very religious and strict life based on their interpretation of the Bible. One of the towns in New England during this time was Salem, which is located in the state of Massachusetts. Salem was not a large city. It was a small village by today's standards. However, it played a significant role in the history of the United States, particularly because of the events we now know as the Salem Witch Trials. Salem, like many other communities in New England, was deeply religious. The Puritan faith was the cornerstone of daily life. People attended church services regularly and followed strict moral codes based on their religious beliefs. This religiosity had a profound impact on how the people of Salem lived and interacted with one another. Patriarchy, a social system where men held the primary positions of power and authority, was a prevalent feature of Salem society. Men were seen as the leaders in both religious and secular matters. Women, while respected, had more traditional roles within the family and community, such as taking care of the household and raising children. Gender roles were clearly defined during this time. Perhaps one of the most important aspects of life in 17th century Salem was the belief in the supernatural. The people of Salem sincerely believed in the existence of witches, demons, and evil spirits. This belief was not just a matter of religion. It was woven into the very fabric of everyday life. It meant that people lived in a world where mysterious events, illnesses, or misfortunes were often attributed to the influence of witches or evil forces. This deep-seated belief in the supernatural would later play a critical role in the Salem Witch Trials, when a series of unusual events and accusations of witchcraft erupted in Salem in 1692. This environment of religious fervor, strict patriarchy, and a profound fear of the supernatural contributed to the tragic events that unfolded. To truly understand the Salem Witch Trials and their impact, it's essential to grasp the unique cultural and historical context of 17th century New England, where Puritanism, patriarchy, and the supernatural were deeply intertwined in the lives of its inhabitants. The Outbreak Begins. In the early months of the year 1692, a most peculiar and troubling phenomenon unfolded in the quiet village of Salem, Massachusetts. This marked the beginning of what would come to be known as the Salem Witch Trials, a dark chapter in American history. The seeds of this tumultuous episode were sown in the behavior of several young girls, most notably Betty Paris and Abigail Williams. These girls were a part of the local community, and their actions would have profound and far-reaching consequences. Betty Paris, the 9-year-old daughter of Reverend Samuel Paris, the village's minister, was among the first to display strange and alarming symptoms. She began to exhibit fits of bizarre and erratic behavior. She would scream, convulse, and behave in ways that defied rational explanation. Her condition baffled her family and the community at large. Abigail Williams, roughly 11 years old at the time, was another central figure in this unsettling series of events. She too displayed similar symptoms of erratic and disturbing behavior. It wasn't long before others in the village began to take notice of these distressing episodes involving young girls. What made these episodes particularly significant was the girls' claims of being possessed by witches. They insisted that invisible forces were tormenting them, and they accused specific individuals in the community of being the witches responsible for their suffering. These accusations would set in motion a chain of events that would shake Salem to its core. The belief in witchcraft was deeply ingrained in the culture of 17th century New England, as we have discussed previously. Thus, when these young girls proclaimed that they were victims of witchcraft, their claims struck a chord of fear and anxiety within the community. The idea of witches using their powers to harm innocent children was a terrifying prospect. The outbreak of this witch hysteria sent shockwaves throughout Salem. It wasn't long before others in the village began to exhibit similar symptoms and make similar claims. The fear of witchcraft began to spread like wildfire, and a sense of panic descended upon the community. Accusations and Arrests. In the turbulent spring of 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, the witch hysteria that had begun with the bizarre behavior of young girls took a darker turn as accusations of witchcraft began to fly. This marked a critical moment in the Salem Witch Trials, as the lives of three women, Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne, became entwined with the unfolding drama. Tituba was a crucial figure in these early accusations. She was an enslaved woman in the household of Samuel Parris, the village minister. Tituba was of African or possibly indigenous descent, and her cultural background was quite different from the Puritan settlers of Salem. This made her a target of suspicion in a community that was deeply insular and held a strong belief in conformity. Sarah Good was a destitute woman who lived in poverty with her family. She was known for her unconventional behavior and had a reputation for begging and wandering. In the highly religious and tightly knit community of Salem, Sarah Good's actions made her a conspicuous outsider. Sarah Osborne was another woman who found herself accused of witchcraft. She was an elderly widow, and like Sarah Good, she did not conform to the strict societal norms of Salem. Her unconventional lifestyle and lack of a strong church affiliation made her susceptible to accusations in this climate of fear and suspicion. The accusations against these three women were initiated by the young girls who had first exhibited strange behavior and claimed to be possessed by witches. In their fits and trances, the girls began to name names, and Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne found themselves accused of being witches who tormented the girls. These accusations carried significant weight in the deeply religious and superstitious atmosphere of Salem. The Puritans believed that witchcraft was a grave sin and a threat to their community. Furthermore, they believed that the devil could work through witches to harm innocent people. Thus, the accusations of witchcraft were taken with utmost seriousness. The authorities in Salem responded swiftly to the accusations. Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne were arrested and brought before the local magistrates. This marked the official beginning of what would become a wave of accusations and trials in Salem. The arrests of these women set a dangerous precedent. They signaled to the community that accusations of witchcraft could result in legal action and punishment. This, in turn, encouraged more accusations as people sought to protect themselves or settle personal vendettas by accusing others of witchcraft. The witch hysteria in Salem was rapidly escalating, and these initial arrests were just the beginning. As the trials unfolded, the lives of many more individuals would be upended, and the village would be plunged into a period of fear and paranoia that would have profound and tragic consequences for its residents. The Court of Oyer and Terminer. In response to the escalating accusations of witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, a significant development occurred in the legal landscape of the village. To address the mounting crisis, a special court known as the Court of Oyer and Terminer was established. This court played a pivotal role in the Salem Witch Trials and would become infamous for its proceedings, marked by a lack of due process and a predisposition towards conviction. The Court of Oyer and Terminer was not a permanent judicial body, but was specially created to deal with the witchcraft cases that had proliferated in Salem. Its name, derived from legal Latin, meant to hear and to determine. This court was convened to hear the cases of those accused of witchcraft and decide their fates. At the helm of this court was Chief Justice William Stoughton, a prominent figure in colonial Massachusetts. Stoughton, who was also the Lieutenant Governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, held significant power and influence. His position as Chief Justice of the Court of Oyer and Terminer gave him considerable authority in the proceedings. However, it quickly became apparent that the Court of Oyer and Terminer was far from impartial. The trials that took place under Stoughton's leadership were characterized by a disturbing bias in favor of the prosecution and a presumption of guilt rather than innocence. Several factors contributed to the notorious partiality of these proceedings. First and foremost, the court accepted what was known as spectral evidence. This form of evidence allowed the accusers to testify that they had been tormented or afflicted by the specters or apparitions of the accused witches. This type of evidence was highly questionable and relied on the belief that witches could send out their spirits to harm others. It lacked any concrete proof of guilt and was essentially based on the word of the accusers. Furthermore, the accused had limited legal representation, and the court often pressured them into confessions. Many of those on trial were uneducated and lacked a clear understanding of legal proceedings, making them vulnerable to coercion. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense and charged with fear. Accusations and hysteria ran rampant, and the court appeared more interested in securing convictions than in ensuring fair trials. As a result, a disturbing number of those accused of witchcraft were found guilty and sentenced to death. The accused and their trials. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 brought forth a torrent of accusations that engulfed the village of Salem, Massachusetts. Among the accused were individuals from all walks of life, including some prominent figures within the community. The trials that followed were marred by hysteria, reliance on questionable evidence like spectral testimony, and the coercion of forced confessions. Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey were two of the most notable individuals caught up in this wave of accusations. Their experiences shed light on the unjust and chaotic nature of the trials. Rebecca Nurse was a respected and elderly member of the Salem community. She was known for her piety and good character. Her age and reputation should have provided her with a degree of protection, but in the climate of hysteria, no one was immune from accusations. In March 1692, she was accused of witchcraft by a group of girls, despite her impeccable reputation. Martha Corey, on the other hand, was a woman with a less conventional reputation in the eyes of Salem's Puritan community. She had been previously accused of witchcraft years before the 1692 trials but had been acquitted. This prior accusation may have made her more vulnerable to renewed allegations. Her husband, Giles Corey, would also become ensnared in the witch trials. The trials of Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, and many others were marked by an atmosphere of intense fear and hysteria. The accusers, often the same young girls who had initiated the crisis, would enter fits and claim to see the specters of the accused torturing them. This spectral evidence, based on the belief that witches could send out their spirits to harm others, was allowed in court despite its dubious nature. It relied solely on the word of the accusers and lacked any concrete proof of guilt. The accused faced a daunting challenge in defending themselves. Legal representation was scarce, and many were ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of the legal proceedings. Furthermore, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which oversaw the trials, demonstrated a predisposition toward securing convictions rather than upholding justice. This bias was particularly evident in the acceptance of spectral evidence and the pressure placed on the accused to confess. Forced confessions became tragically common during these trials. The accused, often exhausted, frightened, and subjected to harsh interrogation, sometimes yielded to pressure and admitted to being witches. These confessions, though obtained under duress, were used as evidence against them and often sealed their fates. The executions. The Salem Witch Trials, a dark chapter in American history, reached their zenith in the summer and early autumn of 1692. This period of frenzied hysteria culminated in the execution of 19 individuals, and among them was Giles Corey, whose unique and tragic fate was to be pressed to death for his refusal to enter a plea. By the summer of 1692, Salem had descended into a state of turmoil. The village was gripped by a pervasive fear of witchcraft, and the court had already conducted numerous trials, resulting in the convictions and condemnations of those accused. The court's reliance on spectral evidence, the testimonies of afflicted girls, and the coerced confessions of the accused had led to a rising body count. Giles Corey, a farmer and a husband to Martha Corey, had become embroiled in the witch trials due to his association with his accused wife. Martha Corey had already been arrested and accused of witchcraft. It was in this context that Giles Corey found himself facing accusations as well. Corey's situation was further complicated by his refusal to enter a plea when he was brought to trial. This legal tactic, known as standing mute, was used by some accused individuals as a means of avoiding a trial altogether. In accordance with English common law, if a defendant refused to plead, they could not be tried. However, the authorities in Salem were determined to break Corey's silence. In a harrowing turn of events, Giles Corey was subjected to a form of torture known as pressing. He was placed on the ground, and heavy stones were gradually laid upon his chest, intending to force him to enter a plea. Corey endured this brutal punishment for 2 days, steadfastly refusing to speak. His stoic resistance, even in the face of excruciating pain, became a symbol of defiance against the injustices of the witch trials. Giles Corey's eventual fate was sealed by this act of resistance. He died under the weight of the stones, crushed to death. His death marked a grim moment in the history of the Salem Witch Trials, illustrating the extreme measures taken to extract confessions and the lengths to which the authorities were willing to go to maintain control over the proceedings. The decline of the witch trials. As the Salem Witch Trials progressed into the latter part of 1692, a gradual shift in public opinion began to take shape. The initial fervor and fear that had fueled the trials started to wane, and voices of skepticism and doubt began to emerge. Among those who played a pivotal role in questioning the validity of the spectral evidence, and consequently, the entire witchcraft proceedings, were Increase Mather and his son, Cotton Mather. Increase Mather was a prominent minister and theologian in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He held a position of considerable influence within the Puritan community and had earned respect for his scholarship and religious leadership. His son, Cotton Mather, was a minister and prolific writer known for his many publications on religious and scientific matters. The Mathers' involvement in the Salem Witch Trials began with a shift in their stance. In the early stages of the trials, both Increase and Cotton Mather had been proponents of the witchcraft proceedings. They had written extensively on the subject, and Cotton, in particular, had published works that supported the witch trials. However, as the trials continued and the scale of accusations and convictions grew, the Mathers began to have doubts. They recognized the dangerous precedent set by the acceptance of spectral evidence, the claims that the afflicted girls could see the spirits or specters of witches tormenting them. Increase Mather, in particular, became increasingly concerned about the reliability of such evidence. In October 1692, Increase Mather published a book titled Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits Personating Men. In this work, he cautiously questioned the use of spectral evidence in witch trials. He argued that the devil could easily deceive people, and therefore spectral testimony should be considered suspect. Cotton Mather, while initially supportive of the trials, also began to reconsider his position. He engaged in correspondence with some of the judges involved in the trials, expressing concerns about the validity of the proceedings. He urged caution and called for a higher standard of evidence in witchcraft cases. The Mathers' shifting stance had a significant impact on public opinion. Their reputation and authority lent weight to the growing skepticism about the trials. Their willingness to question the use of spectral evidence encouraged others to do the same. This change in sentiment eventually contributed to the decline of the Salem Witch Trials. By early 1693, the courts had largely stopped hearing witchcraft cases, and the imprisoned accused were released. The trials came to a halt, and the authorities began to acknowledge the flaws in their approach. The aftermath. In the turbulent history of the Salem Witch Trials, 1693 marked the year when the dark cloud of hysteria and persecution finally began to dissipate. This dramatic shift came about primarily through the decisive action of Governor William Phips, who, recognizing the need for change, dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer. The aftermath of this pivotal decision saw the release of the imprisoned accused and a community grappling with the daunting task of rebuilding shattered lives. By 1693, the Salem Witch Trials had cast a long and ominous shadow over the village of Salem, Massachusetts. The trials had claimed the lives of numerous individuals, left families torn apart, and fostered an atmosphere of fear and mistrust. The legal proceedings had been marked by questionable evidence, coerced confessions, and a palpable hysteria that had gripped the community. The court of Oyer and Terminer, which had presided over many of these trials, had become notorious for its biased proceedings and willingness to accept spectral evidence. It was widely recognized that something needed to change to put an end to the witch trials and the injustices they had wrought. Governor William Phips, who had initially supported the trials, began to have doubts about the proceedings and the impact they were having on the community. He realized that the trials were tearing the social fabric of Salem apart, pitting neighbor against neighbor, and causing immense suffering. In October 1692, Governor Phips took decisive action. He dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer, effectively putting an end to the witchcraft trials. This decision was a turning point in the history of the trials and marked the beginning of their decline. With the dissolution of the court, the imprisoned accused individuals were released from jail. Their release was met with a mixture of relief and trepidation. While they were no longer facing immediate execution, they returned to a community scared by the trials, where their reputations and lives had been forever altered. The aftermath of the Salem Witch Trials was a period of reflection and reckoning. Families who had been torn apart by accusations sought to reunite and heal. The scars of the trials, however, ran deep, and the trauma endured by the accused and their families would resonate for generations. In the years following the trials, there was a growing recognition of the injustice that had been done. Efforts were made to compensate the families of the victims, and in 1711, the Massachusetts legislature passed a bill restoring the names and reputations of the accused individuals. Legacy and lessons. The Salem Witch Trials, a dark and haunting chapter in American history, have left an enduring legacy that continues to resonate today. These events, which unfolded in 1692 in the Puritan village of Salem, Massachusetts, serve as a stark and cautionary reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, the misuse of power, and the critical importance of due process in legal proceedings. One of the most profound lessons imparted by the Salem Witch Trials is the peril of mass hysteria. In the late 17th century, Salem descended into a state of collective fear and paranoia. The community's belief in the existence of witches and the overwhelming panic that followed allowed accusations to spread like wildfire. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and the entire village was gripped by a pervasive dread. This rapid escalation of irrational fear led to wrongful accusations, trials, and executions. The trials serve as a chilling testament to how fear and hysteria can cloud judgment and lead to grave injustices. Equally significant is the stark illustration of the misuse of power. The Salem Witch Trials revealed how those in positions of authority, including judges and religious leaders, could contribute to and perpetuate injustice. The Court of Oyer and Terminer, established to oversee the trials, became notorious for its biased proceedings and acceptance of spectral evidence. This misuse of power allowed the trials to continue unchecked, leading to numerous wrongful convictions and executions. It underscores the vital importance of holding those in authority accountable and ensuring that justice is impartial and fair. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Salem Witch Trials is the indispensable value of due process in legal proceedings. The accused in these trials were often denied fundamental rights. They faced spectral evidence, coerced confessions, and an atmosphere of intense fear and intimidation. The absence of a fair and just legal process resulted in the tragic loss of innocent lives. The trials underscore the critical need for safeguards in the justice system, including the presumption of innocence, the right to a fair trial, and protections against coerced confessions. The legacy of the Salem Witch Trials has left an indelible mark on American history and culture. It has influenced literature, art, and our understanding of justice and human rights. Works like Arthur Miller's play The Crucible have drawn parallels between the Salem Trials and McCarthyism in the 20th century, emphasizing the enduring relevance of these events in our collective consciousness. More information and facts. Accused individuals. Examining the personal stories of some of the accused individuals in the Salem Witch Trials allows us to grasp the profound human impact of these tragic events. These stories shed light on the lives of those who were wrongfully accused and the lasting scars left by the trials. 1. Bridget Bishop. Bridget Bishop was the first person to be executed as a witch in Salem in June 1692. She was a widow known for her colorful attire and independent spirit. Bishop had previously faced accusations of witchcraft in the 1670s but was acquitted. Her tavern, a gathering place for Salem residents, may have made her a target. Despite her pleas of innocence, she was found guilty and hanged. Her case set a chilling precedent for the trials that followed. 2. Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse was a respected member of the community, known for her devout piety and moral character. She was an elderly woman, known to have cared for the sick. Her trial was a shocking turn of events, as her reputation should have offered some protection. However, the spectral evidence and hysteria of the trials led to her wrongful conviction and execution. Her execution deeply troubled the community, as she was seen as a symbol of the injustice of the trials. 3. John Proctor. John Proctor was a prosperous farmer and tavern owner in Salem. He was known for his outspoken nature and occasional conflicts with local authorities. Proctor and his wife Elizabeth were both accused of witchcraft. Despite confessing falsely to being a witch initially, he later recanted, refusing to sign his confession. He argued that he had already sold his soul by confessing. Tragically, both he and his wife were convicted, and he was hanged. Proctor's story was immortalized in Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible. 4. Tituba. Tituba was an enslaved woman in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris, Salem's minister. Her origins were likely Caribbean, and she practiced a form of folk magic rooted in her cultural background. Tituba's unique status and unfamiliarity with Puritan customs made her vulnerable to accusations. She initially confessed to witchcraft, but later recanted. She was not executed but spent time in jail. Her story is a complex intersection of race, culture, and vulnerability in the context of the trials. 5. Giles Corey. Giles Corey's story is particularly tragic and unique. He was a farmer known for his stubbornness and independent spirit. When accused of witchcraft, Corey refused to enter a plea, a legal tactic known as standing mute. To force a plea, he endured the brutal punishment of being pressed with heavy stones. Corey, despite agonizing pain, did not relent. He died under the weight of the stones, becoming a symbol of resistance against the injustices of the trials. 6. Mary Bradbury. Mary Bradbury's story represents a rare instance of escape from the horrors of the trials. She was accused of witchcraft, but managed to evade arrest and fled to New Hampshire. Her family's prominence in the area and her husband's military service may have played a role in her ability to escape prosecution. Bradbury lived to a ripe old age, but her life was forever marked by the specter of the trials. These personal stories highlight the diversity of the accused, from the vulnerable and marginalized to the respected and defiant. They also underscore the randomness of accusations and the devastating impact on the lives of those caught in the hysteria. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a haunting reminder of the fragility of justice in times of fear and prejudice. Legal process. The legal procedures employed during the Salem Witch Trials of 1692 reveal a disturbing departure from established principles of justice and due process. This departure was marked by the absence of proper legal representation for the accused and the lack of a robust appeals process, leading to the erosion of legal safeguards and the perpetuation of injustices. 1. Lack of legal representation. One of the most glaring deficiencies in the Salem Witch Trials was the absence of adequate legal representation for the accused. In many cases, the accused were left to defend themselves or had to rely on inexperienced and untrained individuals. The absence of skilled defense attorneys meant that the accused were ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of legal proceedings. They often faced biased judges and hostile questioning without the benefit of legal counsel to advocate on their behalf. 2. Coerced confessions. The legal process during the trials was marred by the use of coerced confessions. Many of the accused individuals, often under intense pressure and fear, admitted to being witches, even if they were innocent. These confessions, extracted through intimidation and torture, were used as evidence against them in court. The absence of safeguards against coerced confessions undermined the integrity of the trials and violated the principle that confessions should be voluntary and reliable. 3. Acceptance of spectral evidence. Perhaps the most significant deviation from standard legal procedures was the court's acceptance of spectral evidence. This form of evidence allowed the accusers to testify that they had been tormented or afflicted by the specters or apparitions of the accused witches. Spectral evidence was highly questionable and lacked any empirical basis. It relied solely on the word of the accusers and their claims of experiencing supernatural events. Accepting such evidence was a significant departure from established legal standards, as it allowed for convictions based on subjective and unverifiable testimonies. 4. Absence of due process. The trials were conducted with a noticeable absence of due process. The accused often faced biased judges and juries, making it difficult to receive a fair trial. Legal safeguards, such as the presumption of innocence and the right to confront one's accusers, were frequently disregarded. The speed at which the trials proceeded also left little time for thorough legal defense or the presentation of counterarguments. 5. Limited appeals process. Another glaring flaw in the legal process was the lack of a robust appeals process. Once a verdict was rendered, there were few avenues for the accused to challenge the decision. This lack of a meaningful appeals process further diminished the chances of reversing wrongful convictions. Appeals were typically handled by the same judges and officials who had presided over the initial trials, allowing for little impartial review. In summary, the Salem Witch Trials represented a departure from established legal procedures and the erosion of fundamental legal safeguards. The absence of proper legal representation, the reliance on coerced confessions and spectral evidence, the disregard for due process, and the limited appeals process all contributed to a system that was riddled with injustices. The trials serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning principles of fairness and justice in times of fear and hysteria. Public reaction. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 had a profound impact not only on the immediate community of Salem, but also on the broader Massachusetts Bay Colony and the wider American colonies. The trials sent shockwaves through society, and the reactions were a complex mix of fear, skepticism, and concern for justice. 1. Fear and hysteria. The trials in Salem created an atmosphere of fear and hysteria that extended beyond the village. As news of the accusations and convictions spread, it triggered anxiety among neighboring communities. Many individuals feared that witchcraft could be lurking in their own towns, leading to increased suspicion and accusations in surrounding areas. This fear contributed to a broader climate of paranoia. 2. Widespread attention. The Salem Witch Trials gained widespread attention and notoriety. The trials were not isolated events, but part of a larger colonial landscape. The sensational nature of the accusations and the swift executions captured the imagination of people throughout the Massachusetts Bay Colony and beyond. News of the trials traveled by word of mouth, through letters, and by publications in newspapers and pamphlets. 3. Skepticism and criticism. As the trials continued and the number of accusations and executions grew, skepticism began to emerge. Many individuals within and outside Salem began to question the validity of the proceedings. Some expressed doubts about the reliability of spectral evidence, while others criticized the lack of due process and legal safeguards. Prominent ministers, like Increase Mather and his son Cotton Mather, who initially supported the trials, began to voice concerns about the evidence and procedures. 4. Impact on neighboring communities. The Salem Witch Trials had a ripple effect on neighboring communities. Accusations and arrests for witchcraft spread to nearby towns, further fueling concerns about the extent of witchcraft in the region. Communities grappled with the challenges of managing their own accusations and trials, often looking to Salem as a cautionary tale. 5. Shift in public opinion. Over time, there was a noticeable shift in public opinion. As the trials continued and more individuals were accused and executed, a growing number of people began to recognize the injustice and irrationality of the proceedings. The skepticism of prominent figures like the Mathers and the courageous testimonies of some of the accused contributed to this shift. The realization that innocent lives were being lost began to outweigh the initial support for the trials. 6. Calls for reform. The Salem Witch Trials prompted calls for reform in the legal system and a revaluation of the use of spectral evidence in court. The trials had exposed the dangers of allowing fear and superstition to dictate legal proceedings. These calls for reform laid the groundwork for changes in the treatment of witchcraft cases and the protection of individual rights in the American legal system. In conclusion, the reactions to the Salem Witch Trials were complex and evolving. While fear and hysteria initially gripped the region, skepticism and criticism eventually emerged. The trials had a lasting impact on how witchcraft accusations were handled in the American colonies and contributed to a growing awareness of the importance of due process, legal safeguards, and the presumption of innocence. The lessons learned from the Salem Witch Trials continue to resonate in the broader context of American history and the pursuit of justice. Long-term consequences. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 cast a long shadow over the future of the region and left an enduring mark on the American legal system. These events, marked by injustice and hysteria, had profound and lasting consequences that reverberated through the years. 1. Legacy of mistrust. The Salem Witch Trials left a legacy of mistrust and trauma in the region. Families were torn apart, neighbors turned against each other, and the scars of the trials persisted for generations. The memory of the injustices endured during this period served as a poignant reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the misuse of power. 2. Erosion of witchcraft trials. In the wake of the trials, there was a noticeable decline in the fervor for witchcraft trials in the American colonies. The Salem Witch Trials had laid bare the flaws and dangers of such proceedings, and the experience served as a cautionary tale. Communities became more skeptical of witchcraft accusations, and the zeal for witch trials began to wane. 3. Changes in evidentiary standards. The Salem Witch Trials played a pivotal role in reshaping evidentiary standards in the American legal system. The acceptance of spectral evidence, the testimony of afflicted individuals claiming to see the specters of witches, was a particularly contentious issue. The trials demonstrated the unreliability of such evidence and its potential for abuse. Consequently, there was a growing recognition of the need for more rigorous and empirical standards of evidence in court. 4. Protection of individual rights. Perhaps one of the most significant long-term consequences of the trials was the heightened awareness of the importance of protecting individual rights in legal proceedings. The absence of due process, coerced confessions, and the denial of legal representation had resulted in grave injustices. This led to a broader discussion about the need to safeguard the rights of the accused, including the presumption of innocence, the right to legal counsel, and protections against self-incrimination. 5. Influence on American jurisprudence. The Salem Witch Trials left an indelible mark on the development of American jurisprudence. The experiences of the trials influenced legal thinkers and lawmakers, contributing to a greater emphasis on fair trials, due process, and the protection of individual liberties in the evolving legal framework of the United States. 6. Moral and cultural reflection. The Salem Witch Trials became a source of moral and cultural reflection. They were remembered as a dark chapter in American history, prompting discussions about the dangers of intolerance, fear, and prejudice. Works of literature, such as Arthur Miller's The Crucible, drew parallels between the trials and McCarthyism in the 20th century, emphasizing the enduring relevance of the lessons learned from Salem. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials, while a tragic and dark episode, had a profound and transformative impact on the region and the American legal system. They led to a revaluation of evidentiary standards, a heightened recognition of the importance of individual rights, and a lasting legacy. It continues to shape discussions about justice, fairness, and the protection of civil liberties in the United States. The trials serve as a sobering reminder of the consequences of abandoning principles of fairness and justice in the face of fear and prejudice, and they remain a significant touchstone in the history of American law and culture. Memorials and commemorations. The memory of the Salem Witch Trials of 1692 has been preserved and commemorated in various ways by both the town of Salem and the wider United States. These efforts are aimed at ensuring that the lessons of this dark chapter in American history are not forgotten, and that the legacy of the trials is understood and remembered. 1. Salem, Massachusetts. Unsurprisingly, the town of Salem itself holds the most prominent memorials and commemorations related to the witch trials. Salem has embraced its historical legacy and has made efforts to both remember the victims and educate the public about the events of 1692. Salem Witch Trials Memorial. In 1992, on the 300th anniversary of the trials, the Salem Witch Trials Memorial was dedicated. Located next to the old Burying Point Cemetery, this memorial consists of a series of granite benches, each inscribed with the name of one of the 20 individuals executed during the trials. It provides a quiet and reflective space for visitors to remember the victims. Salem Witch Museum. The Salem Witch Museum, established in 1972, is a significant educational institution dedicated to preserving the memory and lessons of the trials. It offers a guided tour that uses life-sized figures, stage sets, and narration to recount the events of 1692 and explore the social and psychological factors that contributed to the hysteria. Salem Witch Trials Tercentenary. The 1992 tercentenary of the trials was a major commemorative event in Salem. It featured exhibitions, lectures, and reenactments that helped shed light on the historical context and the trials themselves. 2. Educational initiatives. Beyond Salem, educational initiatives have been undertaken across the United States to teach students and the public about the Salem Witch Trials. Inclusion in curriculum. The trials are often included in American history and social studies curricula, ensuring that students learn about this important period. This educational focus helps promote a deeper understanding of the trials and their significance. Scholarly research and publications. Historians and scholars continue to conduct research on the Salem Witch Trials, leading to a better understanding of the events and their broader historical context. Academic publications, including books and articles, contribute to the ongoing dialogue about the trials. Documentary films and television. Various documentary films and television programs have explored the Salem Witch Trials, bringing the history and lessons of the trials to a wider audience. 3. Public awareness and tourism. Salem has embraced its historical notoriety and is a magnet for tourists interested in the witch trials. Beyond the specific memorials and museums, the town offers various events, tours, and attractions related to the trials, fostering a greater awareness of this history. In summary, the memory and lessons of the Salem Witch Trials are actively preserved and commemorated in Salem and the United States through memorials, museums, educational initiatives, and public awareness efforts. These commemorations serve as a testament to the enduring impact of the trials and the commitment to understanding and remembering this pivotal moment in American history. They also underscore the importance of learning from the past to prevent the recurrence of injustices and hysteria in society. Literary and cultural impact. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 have left an enduring mark on literature, art, and popular culture, serving as a source of inspiration and exploration for generations of creative minds. These events, marked by fear, hysteria, and injustice, have provided rich material for various works of fiction, including novels, films, plays, and other forms of artistic expression. 1. Novels. The Crucible by Arthur Miller, perhaps the most famous literary work inspired by the Salem Witch Trials, is Arthur Miller's 1953 play, The Crucible. While technically a play, it has been published and read as a novel. Miller used the trials as an allegory for the McCarthyism of the 1950s, where individuals were accused of being communist sympathizers without substantial evidence. The Crucible explores themes of mass hysteria, intolerance, and the consequences of fanaticism. It has become a staple in American literature and is regularly studied in classrooms. The Physic Book of Deliverance Dane by Catherine Howe. This historical novel weaves together the stories of a present-day graduate student and her ancestor, Deliverance Dane, who lived during the Salem Witch Trials. The book explores the idea of a hidden, ancient physic book with magical knowledge. It blends elements of history, mystery, and the supernatural to delve into the enduring fascination with the trials. 2. Films. The Crucible, 1996. Arthur Miller's play was adapted into a film starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder. This cinematic version of The Crucible brought the story to a broader audience and emphasized the themes of persecution, fear, and the abuse of power. Hocus Pocus, 1993. While a family-friendly comedy, this film draws on the legend of the Sanderson sisters, witches who were executed during the Salem Witch Trials. The film's setting in Salem and its use of historical elements have contributed to its enduring popularity, especially during Halloween. 3. Plays. Three Tall Women by Edward Albee. This Pulitzer Prize-winning play explores the life of a woman in her 90s who reflects on her past. One of the key elements of the play is a recollection of her experience as a witch trial accuser in Salem. Through her narrative, the play explores themes of memory, aging, and the weight of past actions. Wicked by Stephen Schwartz. While primarily based on the novel by Gregory Maguire, the musical Wicked includes a subplot involving the persecution of a young woman accused of witchcraft in a society that echoes the hysteria of the Salem Witch Trials. The musical explores themes of prejudice, power, and the complexity of good and evil. 4. Visual arts. Artistic interpretations. Numerous artists have drawn inspiration from the Salem Witch Trials in their paintings, sculptures, and visual works. These creations often explore themes of persecution, the supernatural, and the human condition. The iconic image of witches being hanged or put on trial has been a recurring motif in art. 5. Contemporary literature. Modern works. The legacy of the Salem Witch Trials continues to influence contemporary literature. Authors continue to explore the themes of witchcraft, hysteria, and injustice in various genres, from historical fiction to speculative fiction. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials have had a profound and enduring impact on literature, art, and popular culture. These events, with their themes of fear, persecution, and the consequences of unchecked power have provided a fertile ground for creative expression and storytelling. They continue to resonate with audiences, serving as a reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the enduring fascination with the mysteries of the past. The trial's legacy lives on, not only in history books, but also in the rich tapestry of human creativity and imagination. Modern relevance. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 continue to hold contemporary relevance, serving as a cautionary tale and a point of reference in discussions about justice, mass hysteria, and the protection of civil liberties. These historical events offer insights into the potential consequences of unchecked fear, prejudice, and the erosion of individual rights, and they prompt us to reflect on similar occurrences in recent history. 1. Lessons on mass hysteria. The Salem Witch Trials stand as a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria. The rapid spread of accusations and the willingness of people to believe in the supernatural without concrete evidence showcase the vulnerability of society to irrational fear. In contemporary contexts, events like moral panics, conspiracy theories, and witch hunts can lead to baseless accusations and the scapegoating of individuals or groups. The trials underscore the need for critical thinking and skepticism in the face of collective hysteria. 2. Protection of civil liberties. The Salem Witch Trials illuminate the importance of protecting civil liberties, even in times of crisis. Many of the accused in 1692 were denied fundamental rights, such as the right to a fair trial, legal representation, and protection against self-incrimination. In contemporary discussions, this historical precedent highlights the vital role of safeguards like due process, the presumption of innocence, and the right to a defense in preventing miscarriages of justice. 3. Fear and prejudice. The trials reveal how fear and prejudice can lead to grave injustices. Accusations of witchcraft were often rooted in personal vendettas, social tensions, or cultural misunderstandings. In contemporary society, similar biases can manifest in various forms, including racial profiling, xenophobia, and discrimination. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked bias and discrimination. 4. Historical parallels. While not identical, there have been instances in recent history that bear some similarities to the Salem Witch Trials. One notable example is the Red Scare and McCarthyism in the mid-20th century. During this period, individuals were accused of being communist sympathizers without substantial evidence, leading to trials, blacklisting, and ruined lives. The parallel between the trials and McCarthyism is often drawn in discussions about the consequences of political hysteria and the importance of protecting civil liberties. 5. Contemporary legal precedents. The Salem Witch Trials have influenced legal thinking and precedent. They serve as a historical example of how miscarriages of justice can occur when legal standards are disregarded. In contemporary legal debates, the trials contribute to discussions about the importance of fair and impartial proceedings, as well as the need for safeguards against coerced confessions and unreliable evidence. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials remain relevant in contemporary discussions about justice, mass hysteria, and the protection of civil liberties. They serve as a sobering reminder of the potential consequences of fear and prejudice, and they prompt us to reflect on the importance of upholding fundamental rights and ensuring that justice is administered fairly and impartially. By studying and remembering these events, we are better equipped to navigate the complexities of our own times and work towards a more just and equitable society.